All right, for people thinking about moving to the Oregon coast, there's definitely a lot of misconceptions about what you can get, where, what the process looks like, what these towns look like. And in this video, we're going to talk about some of the biggest myths that we hear from people considering moving to the Oregon coast. All that starts now. Hey, what's up everybody? This is Paul Clem, licensed broker with eXp Realty in Oregon and Washington. And in this video, we're going to talk about some of the biggest myths that we hear from people considering moving to the Oregon coast. Now, the Oregon coast is obviously a beautiful place. People move to be at the ocean. They want to be on the beach. I think a lot of people envision these really idyllic and kind of quintessential beach towns. Now, you're going to get a lot of that at the Oregon coast, but there are some dynamics at play. There are some things about the Oregon coast that I think people really kind of envision the most rosiest outlook about living at the Oregon coast. And there's definitely some things that when we're having conversations with people relocating to Oregon, moving to the beach, that we really end up discussing kind of framing the expectation and the perspective in terms of what you're actually getting yourself into. Now, if this is your first time to the channel or you've been here and you haven't already and you want to get more videos like this, make sure to hit the subscribe button and tap a little bell to get notified every time we drop a new video. Now, again, we work with so many people who are relocating from out of state, and maybe they've spent some time in Oregon, they've gone to the beach a few times. A lot of people we work with have spent a considerable amount of time at the Oregon coast. Some people have even lived there and they're moving back. Either way, a lot of people are starting at a very limited level when it comes to a knowledge base of the area, and again, overall, just what you're getting yourself into. Now, if that's you and you are somewhere else, either not at the Oregon coast, not in Oregon, somewhere around the country, and you're thinking about moving to the Oregon coast, and you want to talk more about some of the things that we'll dig into in this video, give us a call, send us a text, shoot us an email, click the link down below in the description of the video, schedule a Zoom call with us, and we can really dig into some of these things a little bit further and talk about your vision and put together a game plan for you specifically based on what you're looking for. But for now, we're going to talk about some of the biggest myths about living on the Oregon coast, starting with number one. All of these towns on the Oregon coast are right on the ocean. So a lot of people moving to the Oregon coast not only expect to find a ton of beachfront opportunities, but that's where they want to live. You know, people want to be blocks from the beach, people want to have sweeping ocean views, and that is completely understandable. Again, most people are moving to the Oregon coast for the ocean, for the beach, for the landscape and the aesthetic and everything that comes along with that. But so many towns up and down the Oregon coast. I mean, there's dozens of opportunities in terms of where you could land, but really only a handful of places that are truly beachfront and right on the ocean. A lot of towns on the Oregon coast are at the mouth of a river, where a river is coming in from the east, flowing out to the ocean. Like in Astoria, like in Tillamook. You have some bayfront living around Tillamook as well, and around Halem Bay up north. A lot of Newport is on the Aquinnah Bay, down to Florence, which does have some beachfront, but is really on the Siuslaw River, down to Reedsport, down to Coos Bay, which is on Coos Bay, North Bend and Coos Bay right there. You know, not a lot of ocean-facing opportunities there. And you work your way down the line where a lot of these areas do have some beachfront opportunities, but most of the town, again, is really kind of on a bay or at the mouth of a river. So that changes the dynamic a little bit. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that water views in and of itself aren't abundant, because you can be on a river, you can be on a bay, you can be on a lake in some cases as well. There's a stretch of the Oregon coast where there's a lot of opportunity for lakefront living, at least relatively a lot of opportunity. We'll talk more about the housing stock later in this video, but when you get into like Florence, down to Reedsport, down to Coos Bay, there are some lakes, some coastal lakes where there is some residential development there as well. But overall, it's not like every housing development on the Oregon coast is right on the beach, where you can walk to the ocean, walk to the beach, or rather have the ocean views, walk to the beach, which is what most people really want. So it's limited because there might just not be as much as you think. It's also limiting because of the cost of that type of property as well. Either an ocean view or proximity to beach, being able to walk to the beach, or a combination of those things adds a ton of value to properties. So you may come in with a budget in mind. You may have to add 100, 150, 200,000, to your budget to get what you want, but also with, again, beachfront access, beach access, or ocean views, or a combination of those things. All right, myth number 2 is that these are large enough towns to at least accommodate what you're used to in terms of lifestyle and amenities. All of the towns on the Oregon coast are probably going to be smaller than where you're coming from. That's not always the case. We've worked with a lot of people coming from really, really rural areas, and it's really kind of a lateral movement in terms of what they're used to day to day. And that boils down to everything like healthcare, education, but also shopping. Again, things that you would need day to day, things that you would be involved in, whether it's for you, your family, your kids, whatever it may be. There's about a half a dozen towns that are right around 10,000 people. So Astoria, the Seaside area, Tillamook, Lincoln City, Newport, down into Florence, and then Coos Bay, North Bend actually has about 25,000 people between the two towns. Those two towns are connected. And then all the way down to Brookings Harbor, which has about 10,000 people as well. Everything in between, you're going to find a much, much smaller population. It's going to be really anywhere from kind of a little village to a rural feeling type area, one-off developments, areas with hundreds of people or maybe 1,500 people, maybe up to about 2,500 people. Most of the towns on the Oregon coast are really, really small. And if you're not in one of these towns that is at least a bit more populated, around that 10,000 mark, you're probably going to be getting up to or down to one of those towns for things that you would be needing day to day, whether it's groceries, services, fill in the blank. So I think the myth here is really that there's going to be towns that are going to offer, the experience, lifestyle that you're used to. And oftentimes that's not the case. Oftentimes people end up having to make sacrifices and really picking an area by mapping out where they would need to get to participate in or access certain things. Again, amenities, services, you name it. But a lot of people are moving to the Oregon coast because they want to be in a smaller town. They want to have a kind of peace and quiet and privacy and more of a laid-back lifestyle. That is definitely for sure what you're going to get at the Oregon coast. But there's also going to be some sacrifices, no doubt. I mean, some of the larger towns that we talked about are going to have neighborhoods that are really just kind of your run-of-the-mill suburban feeling areas. So I think there are a lot of similarities that you can get from an area that you're coming from, but a lot of people aren't necessarily looking for that suburban feeling development. And that goes back to that first category when we talk about the type of neighborhood or environment that you envision yourself living in. When you start breaking that down, the opportunities become less and less ultimately for probably finding exactly what you're looking for. All right, the next myth to talk about is that crime is everywhere. So a lot of people moving to an area are going to look up crime reports and statistics and maybe look on Reddit, different forums and threads and things online just to get a feel for crime, safety. Now, one thing to keep in mind is, again, these are all going to be really pretty small towns. So where a crime rate might be slightly elevated, the actual number of instances are probably far less than what you're used to or where you're coming from. So there's a lot of relativity here as far as what those numbers look like and what the actual day-to-day experience is going to be. If you look at some of the statistics or if you actually read what some of the locals and what some of the people are saying, it probably seems to be at least a little bit worse than it actually is. Keep in mind, again, these are really small towns that have grown at a steady clip over the past several decades, and the crime rate may have experienced a little bit of an uptick. And for people, living in these areas who've been here for the last 10, 20, 30, 40 years, just the slightest uptick is going to feel like crime is absolutely running rampant. So, it's relative to maybe how it was 15, 20 plus years ago to today, where, the crime rate might be a little bit higher. But comparing it to a major metro area, like in Portland, for example, or some of the more populated areas in Oregon, like Salem and Eugene, for example, it's not going to be like the number of instances of crime is just outrageously high, again, relative to more populated areas and probably like where you're coming from. If you look at a list of places in Oregon that have higher crime rates, you're going to see some areas on the Oregon coast. Astoria, Lincoln City, a few others, for example. And yes, I mean, there's no sugarcoating what actually does exist, and that the fact that there is, of course, a problem like there is anywhere to some degree. When you look at the crime rates too, a lot of it is related to drug use probably, but property crime ultimately, so car break-ins and things like that. So I don't know if there's really going to be an area where we would say don't move here because by and large you're going to be unsafe or you have to fear for your safety. That's really not the case. The Oregon coast has experienced a dramatic shift in the past several decades in terms of their economy, where these were big timber towns. Fishing is obviously a huge industry, but the timber industry in particular took an enormous hit about 30 years ago with some changing environmental laws and rules and regulations and things like that, where that industry was basically all but decimated, and these towns have become more and more economically depressed since that time. Tourism is now the highest industry, or rather the biggest industry on the Oregon coast, and there's definitely a revitalization and a lot of things kind of turning over and coming back, and I think the outlook overall is positive for a ton of these communities on the Oregon coast. But when you have a downturn in an economy, in a relatively depressed economy overall, which again all of the Oregon coast experienced or has experienced to some degree, you find more poverty, you find more crimes of desperation, you find more of these issues, kind of these negative consequences from that type of economic downturn, which I think leads to an uptick in the crime rate. But overall, again, there's nowhere on the Oregon coast that would be considered to be an unsafe place to live necessarily. Some areas are going to have, again, more instances of crime rate, in particular property crime, and those are things that we can talk about more. All right, the next myth to talk about living on the Oregon coast is that it's affordable. Now, this is the West Coast, so relative to anywhere in the middle of the country, it's going to be more expensive. The Oregon coast in general, really Oregon in general, is the least expensive state on the West Coast. Washington is 10, 15, 20% higher. California is obviously a lot higher in terms of housing costs, cost of living, down the line. The Oregon coast, again, being smaller communities, smaller towns, more rural communities in some cases, generally the thought is that there's going to be some relative affordability. And there's a huge range in terms of housing costs in particular on the Oregon coast, where some communities, the median sale price is going to be $900,000, $1 million, $1.1 million. And there's going to be plenty of communities where the median sale price is like $350,000, $450,000, so a little bit more down to earth relative to the rest of the state and really the rest of the country. There's not that big a drop off when you buy in an area that is much, much lower in terms of a median sale price. And again, when you're spending $1 million on a home at the Oregon coast, it's not like you're getting an experience that is 3 or 4 times better buying into that area necessarily. So we can talk more about those dynamics and why some towns are really, really expensive and why some towns are much, much less expensive. I think some people have some apprehension about buying in an area where housing costs seem to be much, much more affordable, because the question is always, okay, why? Why is this area so much cheaper than an area 50 miles up the road? And it's not just 1 or 2 reasons. There's a whole host of dynamics at play there that contribute to that. But in general, I think most people looking at moving to the Oregon coast, when they start looking at homes, when they start looking at prices, are a little bit surprised when they see some of these list prices. Probably the biggest thing that you're seeing is, okay, if I'm moving to the Oregon coast, I'm looking for homes with an ocean view, beachfront, beach access, things like that. And the more you get of that, the better the view, the closer to the beach, the more expensive a home is going to be. So you might see, one home on the west side of the highway that has more of that, that is $100,000 more plus than a very similar home on the east side of the highway that is also pretty close to the beach and pretty close to town, but it's just not quite right there. So you'll see that discrepancy, and I think, again, for most people, they want to be near the beach. They want the ocean front, they want the ocean view, and that's going to certainly add a premium regardless of where you are on the Oregon coast. Now, cost of living overall is going to be pretty comparable up and down the Oregon coast. So if you look at like utilities and groceries and property taxes and things like that, you won't find nearly the range as you do with housing costs. It does seem, though, that in the last even 5 to 10 years, things have become more and more expensive at the Oregon coast. Now, this is kind of a burgeoning tourist economy, and in economies that are catering more to tourism, you're going to see rising costs, in particular for like meals and entertainment, drinks and things like that, things that people get out and do, where of course when people travel to an area, these are things that people are engaged in, but obviously locals want to do that too, but the people who live in an area are the ones that are having to kind of suffer the consequence of rising prices. When these businesses are catering to tourism, they can charge a little bit of a premium. There's going to be more affordable, more kind of local, off the beaten path type options, I think, in most cases, for things that you would need or things that you would be looking for on the Oregon coast. But that is something to keep on the radar as tourism increases as an industry, and Oregon coast businesses really catering to that. You're going to see rising prices. And I think just anecdotally, I mean, prices at the Oregon coast may have outpaced inflation a little bit in the past few years. So that'll range a little bit too, depending on where you are as far as like cost of going out to eat and things like that. Another thing in terms of the cost of living, when you look at maybe assuming that because these are smaller towns, they're going to be more affordable. Regardless of that, you're at the ocean, so your costs for home maintenance are going to be really elevated compared to probably where you're coming from if you don't live on the ocean already. And that's going to be a lot of stuff that you don't maybe necessarily have to do, but if you are maintaining your home at the recommended schedule, I mean, even if you're not hiring people, you're taking a lot of time. You're buying products and tools and things like that to keep the maintenance, have that upkeep on a regular schedule. There's going to be a cost to that you wouldn't necessarily have living in an area that wasn't right on the ocean. All right, lastly, one of the biggest myths is it's easy to find a house on the Oregon coast. And like we've talked about, these are pretty small towns, and not everything is right on the beach, right on the ocean, which is really what a lot of people are looking for. So because these are smaller towns, there's going to be a smaller housing stock overall. So, your starting basis is already, a little bit disadvantaged, especially if you've narrowed it down to like one or two towns. Waiting for the right property to come along can take a really, really long time. We've worked with a ton of people who have been searching on the Oregon coast for the perfect home for like 2, 3, 4 years, just waiting for the right one to come along. Now, those are extreme cases. I don't think you'll have to wait that long necessarily if you can especially keep an open mind and cast a relatively wide net in terms of areas, towns, and the type of property that you would be looking for. But between smaller towns, smaller housing stock, and then really a smaller list than maybe you would think of neighborhoods and communities that check all the boxes for you, in particular, oceanfront, proximity to the beach, ocean views, things like that. When you start narrowing all of that down, it becomes more and more difficult to find exactly what you're looking for. Now that, coupled with inventory, has been really, really low, historically low in the past 3, 4, 5 years. Now there's a little bit of an uptick, a little bit of a swing in the right direction there, where there's more opportunities, but the best houses still get gobbled up. Demand still outweighs supply. So you're seeing more inventory and homes sitting a little bit longer than they had been. But again, the best houses in the best areas still get gobbled up pretty quickly. So that becomes even more difficult when you have this elevated demand, where not only are there fewer options in a lot of cases, those homes sell really quickly. So you have to be able to jump on it right away. And that's where we come in, So ideally, we would have been able to have a really long conversation, and probably multiple conversations, digging into what you're looking for and where. So when something comes up, we can go look at it right away. We can tour it. We can at least have a conversation about it. Ideally, you would have an opportunity to come visit the property before we put in an offer, and what a lot of people end up doing is making a trip, 3, 4 days a week, exploring the Oregon coast, and we can tour some properties at that time. And even if we don't find the right one, we will have at that point gone through some properties together and really dialed in what you're looking for, as far as your priorities and kind of those preferences that you would be looking for in a home. So if you are not local, but something comes up that looks really interesting and it's going to be competitive and we have to jump on it, we can at least go tour in person, take some videos, and probably feel pretty comfortable about proceeding, even if you aren't there in person to see it. So everybody's kind of appetite for that is a little bit different, but that's something we've done for a ton of people, and in some cases that is necessary to get a specific house. But again, that's where we come in, and we have a lot of experience doing that. So smaller towns, smaller housing stock, inventory is low in general, and there's not that many communities and areas that maybe fit exactly what you're envisioning. Now that, you're also competing against multiple market segments. So you have locals, people who already live here who are full-time residents. You have people relocating who are full-time residents, are going to be full-time residents, probably like yourself, or people who are looking for a second home, a vacation home, which might be you as well, or somebody more local, somebody in the Portland area or in Western Oregon, which is a really popular thing for a lot of people in Western Oregon to do, is to have a beach house if they're fortunate enough to be able to do that. But either way, you have people looking for primary residences, people looking for vacation homes, and also investors. So people who are looking to buy a home and make it a long-term rental or a short-term rental, which in a vacation type market is going to be really, really popular. Now, that's actually something that has, that's starting to get more and more regulated. So opportunities for that are shrinking, not growing. But at any rate, a lot of people want to buy a house, put it on Airbnb, and can have a lot of success doing that. So that's another market segment that you're potentially competing with when you're looking for a home on the Oregon coast. So that can make, all of that together can make it pretty difficult to find the right home. So if you are thinking about moving to the Oregon coast, and if you want to talk more about anything we discussed in this video, if you want to talk more about towns, the Oregon coast housing market, what it's like living there, give us a call, send us a text, shoot us an email, or click the link down below in the description of the video, schedule a Zoom call with us, and we can talk more about that. Now, if this video is helpful, make sure to hit the like button. That helps us out a lot. If you want to get more videos like this, make sure to subscribe to the channel, tap the little bell to get notified every time we drop a new video. As always, we really appreciate you watching, and until next time, we'll talk to you later.